Get him off my stage. He's blind. He'll damage the Steinway. That was all it took, one public insult from a famous conductor, and the world almost missed a miracle. Samuel Wilson, a quiet blind veteran, said nothing in return. Keep him away from the Steinway. This isn't a charity recital. The voice cracked through the concert hall like a whip, arrogant and sharp, slicing through the gentle hum of pre-show chatter. Gasps fluttered across the room as heads turned. At the center of it all, beneath the harsh glow of a crystal chandelier, stood an elderly man. He held a white cane loosely in one hand, his other hand hovering in midair just inches above the polished black surface of a grand piano. He did not flinch. He did not speak. But something in the set of his chin, weathered yet steady, refused to yield. The man who had spoken, dressed in an impeccably tailored black suit, stepped forward. Victor Harmon, a name etched into classical music history. The kind of conductor who could silence rooms with the rays of a single baton. His silver hair and icy blue eyes radiated command. People bowed when he entered spaces like this. His interpretations of symphonies were insured for millions. And now those same hands pointed dismissively at the man before him. He doesn't belong on that bench, he said, half to the stage manager, half to the dozens of elite guests already seated. He's blind, for heaven's sake. He'll damage it. Sir, came a tentative voice from behind the curtain. He just asked to touch the keys. He's not even scheduled to. I don't care, Victor barked. You don't let a child play in traffic just because he wants to drive. Get him off my stage. The veteran still hadn't moved. His eyes, milky with clouded pupils, stared somewhere just past piano, though his frame was tall and dignified. His hands were elegant and steady, the hands of someone meant to create sound. I'm sorry, he said quietly, his voice deep and measured. I didn't mean to interrupt. No need to be dramatic, Victor replied coldly, already turning his back. 2 years earlier, Samuel Wilson had been just another invisible figure in the marble-lined corridors of Eastbrook Conservatory, the kind of place where students' surnames mattered more than their talents. Most students came from generational wealth, ambassadors' children, retired ballet legends, sons and daughters of global conductors. Samuel came with nothing but memories of war. No family waiting for his return, just a plain VA caseworker who dropped him off at the campus gate, and a single duffel bag filled with threadbare clothes, a metronome with no battery, and a half-broken Braille reader. At 75, Samuel Wilson carried himself with a quiet dignity that came from surviving what others couldn't imagine. Before losing his sight in an IED explosion during his final tour, he had been a decorated Special Forces operator, the kind whose missions remain classified decades later. The explosion that took his vision left him with nothing but darkness and the memories of fallen comrades. The conservatory didn't technically admit him. He was there under a program called Silent Observer, a euphemism for keeping him far from stages or classrooms but allowing him to soak up the inspiration. A charity case to fulfill their diversity quota. He soaked it up all right. From outside practice rooms, through doors left ajar, from vibrations in the floorboards when pianists practiced upstairs. He spent his afternoon sitting cross-legged in the hallway outside Professor Mitchell's lecture room, tracing music with his fingers in the air, every muscle in his hands twitching with invisible chords. Music had been his salvation after the war. In the sterile VA hospital rooms, a volunteer had brought in a small keyboard. Samuel, still learning to navigate his world of darkness, had placed his fingers on the keys and felt something unlock inside him. The nightmares of explosions and gunfire began to transform into melodies. The screams of his fallen brothers became harmonies seeking resolution. At the conservatory, he was a ghost, a curiosity that students whispered about. The blind veteran, they called him, a relic of wars they'd only read about, sitting silently in hallways, listening with an intensity that made them uncomfortable. It was Mitchell who first noticed. At first, he dismissed it as a coincidence. But one evening, as the rain poured so loudly on conservatory's arched glass roof that even practice became impossible, he saw Samuel sitting there, hands suspended midair, eyes closed, following a silent rhythm. He leaned down. Are you mimicking my lecture? I was trying, Samuel said. I'm sorry. For what? Mitchell asked. Samuel hesitated. For being here. Mitchell blinked. The hallway smelled of old stone and varnished wood. Thunder growled outside. Don't be sorry. Be precise, he said. From that day forward, when the students had gone and the lights dimmed low, Mitchell stayed behind. Unlike the other professors who saw Samuel as a distraction, Mitchell saw something familiar. The same focused determination he'd witnessed in military bands playing under impossible conditions. He taught Samuel not with printed scores but with stories, describing how a fugue should feel like clearing a building, methodical, alert, always aware of what came before. He explained how Debussy was like the moment after combat, when the world becomes hyper-real, unpredictable, fluid, free. He pressed Samuel's fingers into wood to explain the weight of a chord, tapped out syncopations on his knuckles, hummed scales into his ear until he could feel pitch without seeing notation. And Samuel absorbed everything with terrifying speed. His military-trained memory, once used to memorize terrain maps and enemy positions, now stored complex musical structures with perfect recall. But talent in a place like Eastbrook was not enough. When the conservatory announced its virtuoso showcase, Mitchell filled out the application himself. He didn't list Samuel's disability or age. He listed his name, his skill, and a private recommendation, so glowing it bordered on a prayer. Samuel was allowed to audition. Technically, his assigned time slot was 7:45 a.m., before most faculty had even arrived. The piano he was told to use was the old, slightly out-of-tune Baby Grand in the East rehearsal wing, not the concert Steinway. A single judge came to listen. No audience, no welcome. Samuel sat in silence for a long time before placing his fingers on the keys. When he began to play, he didn't just reproduce music. He summoned it, transformed it. Rachmaninoff's prelude in G minor rose from the piano like a living thing, massive, aching, and unspeakably tender. When he finished, the judge nodded curtly and left without a word. Samuel never received a call back, and he disappeared from the conservatory's halls. What he didn't know, what no one told him, was that someone had been watching. The janitor who cleaned the wing every morning had paused outside the door. He had heard what the judge heard, but unlike the judge, he was moved. That night, he uploaded the video he'd quietly taken, titled it Blind Veteran Rejected by Conservatory Plays Rachmaninoff by Heart. The video didn't explode immediately, but a few days later, a piano blogger in Berlin reposted it, then a music therapist in Argentina, then a retired cellist in Brooklyn. The shares tripled by the hour. Comments poured in from every continent. He plays like he's telling war stories through his fingers. One wrote, I felt that in my chest. The conservatory board panicked, not publicly, but behind closed doors. Furious meetings were held. One particularly nervous administrator asked if they could track Samuel's whereabouts. Another reminded them that he didn't even own a phone. He was unreachable. Until he wasn't. An envelope arrived at the conservatory's front desk, hand-delivered, gilded edges, from the International Gala of Human Harmony, a global concert broadcast to over 60 countries. This year's theme, Breaking Barriers in Sound. They wanted Samuel Wilson to open the show. The dean choked on his espresso. It wasn't a request. It was a declaration. A spotlight had been cast. And for the first time, Samuel was no longer a hidden shadow in the back hallway. He would share the same stage as Victor Harmon himself. And Victor did not take the news well. He'll ruin the program's integrity. Victor's voice was low, calm, almost pleasant. Too calm, the way a winter wind can be quiet right before it bites. He spoke to the gala's director, an elderly man named Gerard Morrow, whose career had spanned every corner of global music diplomacy. The two were standing near the edge of the stage during a pre-rehearsal walkthrough in Vienna's Grand Harmony Hall. He's an old man, blind, untrained. It's political, you know it is. Gerard raised an eyebrow, his French accented voice carrying just enough steel to remind Victor he wasn't speaking to a sycophant. And yet the world is waiting to hear him. Or haven't you seen the numbers? Victor exhaled, sharp and slow. This isn't a talent show. No, Gerard replied, smiling faintly. It's a reckoning. Somewhere across the city, Samuel Wilson stood barefoot in the quiet of his hotel suite. The floor beneath his toes was cool marble, veined like river branches frozen in time. He tilted his head slightly as he listened to the wind against the window, then to the silence between the gusts. Even in unfamiliar cities, he mapped his world through sound. The low growl of distant traffic, the high-pitched stutter of a faulty elevator 2 floors above, the tiny irregular tapping of a tree branch against the glass. It all fit together like an unspoken score. Professor Mitchell had flown with him, despite no longer holding any official title. He refused to leave Samuel's side, even when Conservatory tried to replace him with a flashy manager. "You know," Mitchell whispered during flight, "in all my years, I never imagined I'd be flying across the world with the finest pianist I ever taught, and one the school never admitted." Samuel smiled softly. "They admitted my footsteps. That's something." Mitchell chuckled. "You always did play with a quiet kind of defiance I recognized from the best soldiers." The rehearsal was scheduled for the following afternoon. Samuel had not yet touched the piano, not since the day he'd walked off that stage. He hadn't dared, not because of fear, but because something inside him had shifted. Playing used to be his escape, his way of folding the war into melody when life refused to be kind. But now the world wanted to listen. Not as background noise, not as indulgence, as truth, and the weight of that was immense. Still, when the moment came, when the doors of the rehearsal hall opened and the spotlight swept down from the rafters like a blade of light, he didn't hesitate. He stepped forward calmly, with Mitchell at his side, until his fingers brushed the edge of the piano bench. It was the same make he'd always dreamed of, a Steinway concert grand. The finish was cold, smooth, untouched. His fingers trembled just for a moment, then fell still. And then he sat. Every sound in the hall retreated. Even the dust seemed to pause. He placed his hands on the keys, but didn't play. He simply held the silence in his palms, stretching it, commanding it, until it bent to his will. And then, with a breath so quiet it barely belonged to him, he began. The notes that spilled out weren't from any known sonata or concerto. They didn't follow a familiar pattern. No famous composer had inked them centuries ago. They were his, raw, unscored, born in that exact moment, a blend of memory and invention. He began with a single sustained G, soft, uncertain, like a soldier reaching into a dark room, then a ripple of triplets down the right hand, followed by a broken chord progression that sounded like sunlight filtered through grief. The left hand moved slowly, deliberately, more felt than heard. Those present, technicians, ushers, even a man fixing a rigging cable, stood frozen. No one gave a cue. No one dared interrupt. Even Victor, standing near the wings, had stopped mid-sentence when the music began. He didn't move. His eyes narrowed. There was something haunting about it, something unsettling. He's not reading from anything, he thought. Not even muscle memory. This is pure invention. No one plays like this without being broken first. And then it dawned on him. Samuel wasn't broken. He was. The melody morphed. A sudden shift. Minor chords now. Melancholy notes rising in wounded defiance. His body leaned forward slightly, as if pulled by invisible threads. His face was serene, not joyful, not pain, just open, like a door left ajar during a storm. Then, without warning, he stopped mid-chord. His hands hovered. No resolution, no applause, just silence. And that silence thundered through the chamber like the aftermath of war. The rehearsal director stepped forward, stunned. "Mr. Wilson, will that be your piece of the gala?" He tilted his head, considering. "No," he said. "That was just a warm-up." Victor clenched his jaw. The next day, the gala director received a request from Victor Harmon's agent. He wanted to change the performance order. Victor no longer wished to follow Samuel's set. He wanted to open instead. The request was denied. Meanwhile, news of Samuel's rehearsal leaked. Somehow, someone had taken a short audio clip on their phone and posted it to a classical music forum. The clip, just 45 seconds long, was shared over 3 million times in 12 hours. Headlines followed. The blind veteran who doesn't read music, the soldier who silenced a concert hall. Rachmaninoff reincarnated? No, Wilson begins. Victor spent the night in restless pacing, not out of jealousy, not exactly, but fear, not of Samuel, but of something deeper, of irrelevance, of watching his legacy get eclipsed not by time, but by a man who played with a kind of purity he hadn't touched in decades. On the morning of the gala, the Grand Harmony Hall buzzed like a beehive of silk and diamonds. Diplomats, royalty, philanthropists, critics, and composers filled every velvet seat. The orchestra tuned beneath golden archways. Cameras were locked in. Backstage, Victor warmed up alone, his fingers dancing over the keys with practiced flair. Every note exact, every tempo obeyed. He didn't realize that just one room over, Samuel sat with his fingers on his lap, doing nothing but breathing, listening, mapping the resonance of the concert hall by its breathing, feeling the vibrations on the floor as the audience shuffled in. He didn't need sight. He could feel the weight of thousands. Professor Mitchell stood beside him, quietly holding his cane. "Are you afraid?" he whispered. Samuel shook his head gently. "No," he said. "I've already played my hardest song in the dark of field hospitals. This one is just truth." Mitchell smiled. "Then give it to them." Samuel nodded, then stood. A stagehand opened the side curtain. It was time. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed across the opulent auditorium, "please welcome to the stage, Samuel Wilson." A ripple of curiosity ran through the audience. Some leaned forward, brows raised. Others tilted their heads toward their programs, flipping pages to find the unfamiliar name. A few whispered to their neighbors. Most had never heard of him. Those who had seen the viral video from weeks before now sat motionless, anticipation bubbling under their skin like a drawn breath that couldn't be released. The house lights dimmed. A single beam of warm gold spilled down from the rafters onto the stage, illuminating the grand Steinway that stood like a monolith of sound, waiting to be awakened. And then he appeared, not in a dramatic entrance, no fanfare, no sweeping gesture. Just Samuel, in a simple black suit that had seen better days, one hand gently resting on Professor Mitchell's arm, the other loosely holding his white cane. The audience watched in reverent silence as he approached the piano, his step slow, deliberate, but without a hint of fear. His head turned slightly as he counted the spacing. Mitchell guided him gently to the bench, then stepped back into the shadows, like a guardian who fulfilled his purpose. Samuel sat for a moment. He didn't move. His hands lay in his lap, and his head bowed, not in submission, but in communion, like a priest before the altar or a soldier before the storm. The silence became sacred, and then, barely audible, he inhaled. His fingers rose and hovered, and they began to play. But what came wasn't a recognizable prelude. Not Chopin, not Beethoven, not Bach. No one in the audience could name it, because it had no name. It was something else, something older than sheet music, deeper than memory. It was a story. The right hand fluttered in ripples across the upper register, delicate notes that danced like raindrops skipping across glass. They were playful, hesitant, childlike. The left hand joined a moment later, slow and rich, anchoring the melody with the gravity of fallen comrades, of a life forever changed by war. Those in the audience who had seen hardship felt it instantly. The trembling start, the notes stumbling, searching, then suddenly finding clarity. A rising scale that soared briefly, triumphant, then collapsed again into minor keys that sounded like unanswered prayers. It was not a performance. It was remembrance. A sigh from the front row broke the air. An ambassador's wife dabbed her cheek with the corner of her glove. A young violinist in the balcony leaned so far forward that his glasses fell from his face and clattered onto the floor below. But no one shushed him. No one moved. Because now Samuel's tempo shifted. The chords thickened. His fingers struck the keys with unexpected power, percussive bursts that thundered like artillery fire. His entire body moved with the sound, shoulders tight, spine bowed. The rhythm became defiant, angry, alive. This was no longer just memory. It was resistance. The music seemed to cry out. I was never given a chance. You looked past me. You shut your doors. But I am still here. Each crescendo struck like a confession. Each diminuendo left a vacuum, drawing the crowd in closer. Even Victor, watching from the green room through a live monitor, had frozen mid-step. He had one hand on the tuning keys of his own piano, but he wasn't touching them now. His mouth was slightly open, his eyes narrowed. Samuel had no sheet music, no orchestra, no conductor, and yet he commanded every soul in the room like a maestro. If you were moved by Samuel's journey from silence to recognition, please share your thoughts in the comments. We respect every story of perseverance and would love to hear what this veteran's courage means to you.